have Cassie Hayes from Texas Tech University as well, with winning friends and influencing people, characteristics of CI opinion leaders. Cassie, take it away.
So, as Wendy mentioned, I am Cassie Hayes, and I am a second-year PhD student in Media and Communication at Texas Tech University. My interests include organizational communication, political institutions, and the role of persuasion in the diffusion of new technologies. So really, I look at how our words shape our things, our gadgets, and our institutions. And as Wendy mentioned, I'll be presenting winning friends and influencing people, characteristics of cyber infrastructure opinion leaders. So there will be a little bit of crossover with what Alex is talking about, but I'm focused more on the internal communication, though there's some external elements in here. So you've probably heard of social media influencers, people with tons of followers who can in an instant sway thousands of people to buy a product or think a certain way. Well, here I'm looking at CI influencers. So what do these certain people do that influences new users to adopt CI? So I do want to note here, like Alex, I was working with people on this project. I'm part of the Innovation Diffusion Lab at Texas Tech, led by Dr. Kurt Key. And I worked on this project with Alex and Chaitra, who are listed there at the bottom of the screen. And they're also in the lab, so we worked on this together. And as I mentioned, we're looking at CI influencers, or to use the proper terminology, CI opinion leaders. What qualities do people currently working with this within the CI community emphasize about the people who encourage them to adopt the innovation? And that is our research question listed up here. So first off, I'm going to explain a little bit about the context of CI. Alex did a great job summarizing like what the technologies are and what the community is. But I'm going to highlight some things here that I think are important to understanding the implications and the significance of this study that we did. So first off, some contextual things. So CI is complex and it's abstract. I can't hold it in my hands, and you guys can't go to Target after this and go pick up some CI. It's something that's difficult to think about sometimes because it's so dispersed and spread out and a bunch of different things. It's also multidimensional, including material technologies, as well as the ideological and behaviors of the larger community. Because it's such a large-scale, complex innovation, it is crucial that effective opinion leaders promote it in order to get new users to adopt it and therefore sustain the technologies and community for the long term. So I keep mentioning a couple different terms that Alex also used this theoretical perspective, but I'll just explain the importance of it within this study. So for this study, we used diffusion of innovations as our theoretical background. So diffusion of innovations involves how new ideas, behaviors, and technologies spread through social systems. This process involves individuals and organizations perceiving an innovation, such as CI, and deciding, you know what, this is cool, we think we can use this, and actually implementing it. This process is facilitated in part through the influence of opinion leaders and opinion leadership. These are people who are important and influential within the social system of potential adopters. So for instance, you're probably more likely to adopt something that your cool friend is saying works and is cool, rather than, you know, accepting the word of some door-to-door salesman who you barely know. You can see the official definition down here provided by diffusion scholar Everett Rogers for opinion leadership. So the degree to which an individual is able to influence other individuals' attitudes or overt behavior informally in a desired way with relative frequency. And like Alex, we were using for this study those transcripts from a pre-existing continuing study that we're helping Dr. Key work on. So we analyzed those interviews with CI professionals using the grounded theory perspective, which basically is just a qualitative data analysis method that allows conceptual themes and ideas to kind of rise to the surface organically from the data rather than going into the data with like preconceived interpretations. And within the interviews, participants were asked if there were any specific people who influenced their decision to adopt CI. For this study, we looked at those answers. So just those answers specifically, how those CI professionals described their personally important CI opinion leaders who influenced their decision to join the community. So first, I do want to note, like with Alex's study, we're still kind of working on this. So this is just some preliminary findings from our initial coding and look through. I think it still requires some, combining some of these and finding larger conceptual themes, which we'll do at a later date. So overall, in our preliminary findings, CI professionals described that opinion leaders who influence their personal decision to adopt the innovation do the following things. So first off, they lead by example, spreading excitement about CI by showing successes and enthusiasm. So they may be high flyers in the community, so people who have been using this a lot and successfully making groundbreaking discoveries, or they might just be good at talking about the technologies and using that external communication that Alex emphasized. They also write love letters about CI, so they advocate for the innovation. They don't just sit there and use it. Influencers go to bat for the innovation to get funding, which I think Sayo mentioned yesterday is super important to CI. To get support from university decision makers, because these are often tied to a university in some way. And they are internally encouraging. So within those project teams, they're just an encouraging force saying, hey, you can be a part of this, you can do this. They also bridge the gap between users, the public, and the community of CI and are accessible. So I think accessibility is a big one to emphasize here. These people are accessible and make the technologies accessible even though they're abstract. And this is important because CI is largely supported by taxpayer money. So it needs to at least be accessible to the public in some form, at least the information that you get from these technologies, even if not everybody can use them. So that's a big one, at least to me. Influencers also share information openly. So they're trainers, professors, and mentors that coach new users. Many of the influencers that were mentioned by CI professionals are just good teachers. So they are effective at engaging students to actually use this technology and feel comfortable within the community. CI influencers are people and user focused. They navigate CI advancements toward the needs of that the innovation can meet for users. So influencers have their fingers on the pulse of research practices and society, trying to anticipate what problems the technologies can actually solve for human people. And finally, CI influencers envision and articulate a sustainable future for the CI discipline. So they have a long-term focus. They see the forest rather than just the trees. And they also don't force the innovation into places it doesn't belong, but instead spark organic interest in new users. So they say, hey, this is interesting because it can help solve your problems and we can do things that you actually want to pursue with this innovation. So overall, all these that you see listed here on screen, these preliminary findings emphasize that with such a large-scale innovation as CI, a human face is essential for its diffusion. These CI influencers, beyond anything else, are people. They represent the complex innovation of CI in a way that's human, so they make it approachable. These CI influencers offer people a seat at the table, focus on how CI can help them as people, as researchers, and aren't shy about talking up how great the technologies and community are. So I think that last point hits on stuff Alex talked about with external communication, but also internally within the team, knowing, you can use the technologies to solve this problem, and talking about that. So literature in organizational studies has shown that leadership itself is not an inherent gift buried within a few lucky souls. Rather, leadership skills can be learned, especially through a focus on intentional communication practices. With this study, we argue that opinion leadership is the same way. CI professionals can further learn how to be positive leaders in their communities, helping to fuse CI technologies to others and hopefully new generations. And this is just an add-on to what they're obviously already doing, because most CI professionals that we did interview mentioned a few people that sort of drug them into the community by saying, hey, you can be a part of this. Given the revolutionary potential of CI, both for research practices and as a public good, as Alex kind of talked about, such an argument could have wide-ranging theoretical and practical implications. So that is all I've got. Any questions?
Hey, Cassie, that was a nice presentation. It's interesting to hear about CI influencers. That's the first time I think I've heard, a talk like that. I was wondering if you based the title of this talk on like Dale Carnegie's book, and she might be aware of it. The title sounds almost the same.
Yeah, I definitely did. I was like, what sexy title can I give this? And that's what I came up with.
Nice. So I was wondering, like, I guess if you were to just look at influencers in general, it's easy to identify them because you can just go on like social media and you can be like, hey, this person has X amount of followers, probably an influencer. But in the context of like the CI community, I'm sure people just don't have Instagrams with like millions of followers, right? Maybe their influence is like going to conferences and participating a lot, and they have a big social network, and you just can't quantify it like you can with like regular social media. So how do you like sort of pinpoint like an influencer, and you would know that that's an influencer in CI?
Great question. So I use the example of social media influencers, and obviously, you can see, well, that person has 1 million followers, but really the influencers that actually matter to most people are just the informal people within their community who they go to when they have questions, when they need guidance. Maybe within the CI community, it's people with publications, people who created some technology that helped solve problems, and that this person did that and can answer your problems too. Mm-hmm. And I would also say it's just the people who have been hanging around a while and know the history and talk about the history of this emerging sort of field. Mm-hmm. So that's probably where I would start within CI. Just the people who seem to be able to answer your questions would be the influencers.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's really good to have that kind of distinction, because I think the term influencer gets a negative, like it's kind of a negative term. It can be interpreted as like a negative term, because we see people on social media and you're like, oh, look at that influencer. But in the context of CI, like I wouldn't want people to have that kind of impression about like a CI influencer, I guess.
Yeah, like the Kardashians or somebody.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and really the term is opinion leaders, which is the term I prefer. Influencers is just a way that, it makes sense when you talk about it. Opinion leadership is the actual diffusion term.
I see.
Because they're leaders within the community.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I have to say that I enjoyed your presentation, and also Alex's. It really makes you think differently of CI, and I'd love to talk more at some point how we can leverage some of these concepts to become more influential and have more penetration with the Pegasus software. So.